So is there something you want to do in terms of
let me just
hiding it?
Just make sure that your neckline is straight here.
This is a bad shirt to wear for an interview. I should have thought about that.
It's totally fine.
I've been told so much. Usually that's on the list of things. They tell you to wear a stiffer shirt to interviews for that reason.
No line, no. That's okay. I'm flexible. I can adjust. So, Linda, can you wait? Let me reframe you just a little. Okay.
I did part a little bit about talking about from the research end and educating professionals on health and exercise and that importance.
Yeah, awesome. You can start with the questions if you want, Deb.
Oh, okay.
Well, the first question I wanted to ask is, do you think that most doctors are aware of their stigma or their prejudices around weight?
One of the things that concerns me the most about how healthcare practitioners work with fatter people is that many of them aren't aware of the assumptions and stereotypes that they hold, that they believe that their value system is neutral and that they're open-minded. And that, I think, is one of the biggest damages that we see. Because when people don't recognize their assumptions, what that means is they've absorbed the assumptions of the status quo. And so therefore, most doctors are going into their doctor-patient relationships with certain ideas about the people that are sitting in front of them that most likely don't really hold up to what that person's life is really like. And if I were to think about one of the most important things that I would suggest to doctors is that what is most important when you're working with people is to be aware that, that probably it's the relationship that a doctor has with a patient that is more important than the ideas that either one of them comes into the meeting with. And that if doctors could just be quiet enough to listen to the patient's experience, then that is what can allow good diagnosis to take place. Because what doctors will often find is that the assumptions they might have had don't really hold up to who that real person is in front of them. So as an example of that, in our culture we just have this belief system that fatter people are eating more than thinner people. Yet we don't have any data that really supports that. Unfortunately, however, many doctors go into the doctor-patient relationship with the expectation that that larger person is eating more and that they need to put them onto a diet or discuss eating habits with them. And that might not be helpful for that person. That's a stereotype. It might not describe their experience. So I think it's really important that doctors leave their questions open-ended, that they don't walk in with assumptions, and they try to gather from the patient what it is that they need and start from there.
What does the research tell us about the efficacy of dieting?
Whether or not diets work is probably one of the most well-tested experiments that we've done. We've got decades and decades of research of prescribing diets to people. What we don't have is any evidence after all of this examination of their long-term efficacy. The research shows us again and again that while almost everything can be successful on a short-term basis, when we start to carry out these experiments long-term, we see that the vast majority of people regain the weight. Sometimes they even gain more. And in fact, if we look at prospective studies, what we see is that dieting is one of the biggest predictors of long-term weight gain. That most of the prospective studies, all of the prospective studies are showing us that people that have more dieting history tend to gain weight over the long term, whereas the people who don't diet tend to be the people that are weight stable.
Do you think the doctors are aware of this latest research, or?
Well, The research hasn't changed for decades. All the research has been showing us again and again that while dieting is effective on a short-term basis, the few times that we actually look at it on a long-term basis, what we find is that the majority of people regain the weight regardless of whether the initial regardless of whether the initial weight loss came from diet, whether it came from exercise, whether it came from a combination of the two, or whether it came from other changes in lifestyle behaviors.
Deb, do you have one?
Across the label spectrum, because one of the things that we keep running into, and so I ask the situation, whenever we do these conferences, is we tend to focus on higher weight. But I think all of this weight stigma and stuff and research also, identifies that when they're in the weight spectrum. So if you can say something, speak to that a little bit.
Can I just ask as well? Maybe it's worth saying something, because often we look at things, diets don't work, but even if they did work, it's still a problem.
Right.
And I think as well that the work is translated as lead to long-term weight loss, but it misses the fact that it's doing damage. So maybe just say that it's not a benign, it's not a benign experiment, it's harmful in and of itself.
Right.
Yeah. So that, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so first answer the question, so what? If it works for a couple percentage of people, why don't we do it?
Right.
That's you. Sorry.
More and more it's entered into the common discourse that diets don't work, and there's increasing recognition of that. But there's another level that we need to consider. Not only don't they work, but they're incredibly damaging. The whole concept of trying to get people to a smaller weight sets everybody up to feel bad about their bodies and increase the stigmatization that's out there. It doesn't benefit the larger people who are being told that they're wrong, nor does it benefit the people in thinner bodies who then have to spend their lives living in fear of fatness and get stuck on that belief that if only they can control what they eat or their exercise habits, that then it's going to save them from the tyranny of living in a larger body. So we need to be careful about the messaging that's behind that. We need to be careful about the potential damage that we're doing anytime we encourage people to diet or to try to lose weight.
So what about the people who say, well, if we shame people, they'll engage in better behaviors?
I've heard it said many before that if shame were an effective motivator, there wouldn't be any fat people. And I think that that statement just holds so true, that it's so hard to live in a fatter body in this culture. And if people didn't have to, they wouldn't. And in fact, most fatter people spend their entire lives trying to fight that. So we can see that that shame hasn't been effective. And on the other hand, there's an incredible amount of research that shows us that when people start from a place of appreciating and enjoying their body, they take better care of it. That it's a lot better to nourish something that you care about than to try to take good care of something that you dislike.
Can you really quickly summarize the study that you did with the exercisers that are doing the health at every size model versus traditional dieters?
Mm-hmm. When I did my research, which compared what happens when you give people the conventional methods, I did a research study that compared what happens when you give people the conventional messages that it's better to lose weight, that you should try to diet, and that you should exercise in this prescribed way. And you compare that to a group of people who are trained in the health at every size model, where we're just encouraging people to listen to their body cues and to appreciate their bodies rather than having as an end goal trying to change their bodies. One of the things that we saw that was a phenomenal difference in the two groups had to do with activity levels. That in the conventional diet group, what we found was at first they jumped on the bandwagon. They were joining gyms, or they were walking in their exercise groups, and they were enthusiastic, and they had a lot of hope, and it was successful for the short term. But then we looked over the long run, and when their weight didn't do what it was supposed to do, when it was too painful to kind of stick to this outside idea of what they wanted to, exercise levels dropped off over time. And that was in such sharp contrast to what had happened in the Health at Every Size group. Because in the Health at Every Size group, they were learning to just find ways to appreciate and enjoy their bodies more. So instead of looking at exercise as something prescriptive and trying to get a certain amount of time in or a certain heart rate, they were looking at, what is it that's fun for me to do? And that model just seemed to be so much more effective. We found in the long run that not only did their exercise levels increase fairly dramatically, but that they maintained it over time. And they stopped looking at it as exercise. It was just part of what they did naturally. And so that kind of an attitude just makes it so much more sustainable. It wasn't surprising when it showed up in the research that they were being so much more active over time.
So, yeah, okay, I just have one more question, and that is, what incentive do we offer medical professionals to reduce the amount of weight stigma in their practice? Like, how do we get them interested in it? What's in it for them?
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that most people become physicians because they honestly care about other people's health, and that's their goal. And they know how difficult it is living in a larger body, and they've seen the connections with disease. And what I'd really like to recommend to doctors is that we know how to help people. But one thing that has not proven to be successful is giving those weight loss messages. That if you really want to help people to get into bodies that are just more functional and successful in the world, that I didn't articulate that well. That what doctors will find is that the more that they can lighten up on the message that you need to be in a different body in order to be healthier, the more they'll give their patients access to being able to take better care of their body. That addressing weight stigma is going to be much, much more powerful than addressing weight directly as a problem.
Can you use the word compliant?
Oh, well, we're out of tape, so.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks.